Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, how many consultants does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it depends on your budget. Our special guest is just us, and we're going to be humble, sincere, and pretty damn honest about this whole world of consulting.
The Planning Commission podcast is a spirited discussion with myself and a couple of my longtime colleagues in the profession. Our discussions are based solely on our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of our employers, the American Planning Association, or even our alma maters. So grab a seat in the back of City Hall, dig out an old copy of Robert's Rules, and for goodness sakes, read your packet. The Planning Commission is now in session.
It is humbling.
It reminds me of that motivational poster. It said, consulting, why be part of the solution when you can prolong the problem?
That's right. Absolutely. Got to create overhead somehow. All right. Commissioner Smith, you in the chambers? Yes, you
I'm
are.
Here.
Commissioner Kostlik?
Present.
And myself. All right. Yeah, we've been wanting to do this episode for a while. All three of us are in the consulting game and have been for quite some time. Also, all three of us have public sector experience. Jess, well, I don't know. Jess, how long were you in the public sector?
Off
and on, all told?
It used to be half and half, but now I think my consulting experience has outrun my public sector, because I think I've done 6 years in public sector.
The darkness has overtaken the light, huh?
Now it's like 11 in consulting. Yeah, it's over now.
Ooh, I'm close to that too, because I've got like 6 years in the public sector, but like 14 in private.
Oh yeah, I would say you're way over. I'm not even close. I'm two in the public and whatever, it's been 12, 13 in private. So more than that, I guess. So, all right. I want to ask you a question. We're going to get silly, stupid, and I'm certain of that, and constructive. But I want to open us up a little bit. I've been asked, and you all have probably heard this before we get to the whiskey pairing, to talk about ourselves a bit in our own experiences, because that's part of what this podcast is about. It's the color, I think, that fills in the lines a little bit, right? The human element of us, our background, and our guest's background. And I think being raw and being honest has a strong appeal and benefit, because otherwise we're just, blowing smoke, and that's not our objective. So on that note, before we do get to the maybe fun and constructive, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. You weren't prepared for this. What is your most disappointing or humbling experience that you ever had as a consultant? Tough one, right?
No, I got you.
Probably, all right, go rock on.
Probably advertising a pubic meeting. That was pretty rough.
I'm not going to let you get away with that one. There's got to be something
spell
deeper
check
than that.
does not capture.
I also misspelled transportation on a flyer one time. I mean, I think I actually printed them all before I saw it. It didn't go out because I caught it before it went out, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Spell checks
I'll
rough.
give you a couple. I was thinking about this, obviously, and I'll get pretty raw for just a quick second. Don knows this story because he was with me when it happened.
I was going to say I might be repeating this.
Yeah.
No.
So I think it was, I don't know, second year of having a company, and things were trending, things were going well. And we had, I think it was about 4 or 5 irons in the fire for prospective projects. And every single one of them, they're like, oh, we feel good about this. Yeah, this is good. And I'm looking at it and going, holy cow. Like, I had just been, you got to understand, set the stage a little bit. I had just been run through the ringer twice. In other words, let go, put on my butt twice. And because of the economy, and no work. Okay. So 2 times in 18 months, I was let go because of simply just no work. And that's really hard. So my company was born out of that. And so here a year later, still feeling and licking my wounds, right, was all this opportunity. And Dawn and I were driving back from a trip up in the north part of our state. And within like, I think it was within about 12 hours, something like 3 or 4 of those prospects all were notified, and every single one of them came up short. And we didn't get it, Chris. We didn't get it. Nope, sorry. Oh, and I had them, I don't know what came over me, but I looked into the future and thought, here we go again, right? Here we go again. And these projects that I thought were going to kick, pull us out of the ashes a little bit, and everything did not come to fruition. And I literally was moved to tears. And I had to sit on a curb in a stupid commercial development and kind of collect myself because, and a couple other times on that drive, because of how disappointed I was, and the feeling. And again, I think a lot of it resonated with what had just transpired of getting run through the ringer in the private sector in particular, in only a year or two before that. So I think all of it was this culmination. That was one of my, I'll let you guys go.
And I mean, that was at a point of probably putting 100 hours, maybe more, into the upfront stuff to try to get to that point. So, I mean, that's like the double whammy there when you've put in that much effort.
Right. Yeah. So, all right, that's mine. What's yours? Come on. It can't be more than pubic, for crying out loud.
It's a good way to start, though. Humbling experiences. I mean, when I first started work as a consultant, I was an engineer, and I was a transportation engineer, and they can't even really call you that at that point until you're licensed, which I wasn't. I was right out of school. And I remember the moment that I realized I didn't know anything about the built environment in the real world, like looking at it, like on a 2D piece of paper, I could look at something and go, oh, this is, where the ditch is, right? And I could read a topo map and everything, but everything that I had been taught was in 2D. So when I'd go out into the field, I remember this structural engineer who I really liked working with eventually, but I mean, he would just say stuff like, what do they teach you kids in school these days, kind of thing, And I remember he said, go down to the toe of the slope and measure from there. We were out looking at this potential project, and I was like, what's the toe of the slope? I mean, that's where I was in my knowledge of the world. I was like, I know where it is on a piece of paper, but like, where is it supposed to be out here? And he just looks at me and he's like, the toe of the slope. And I was like, okay.
Pinky toe.
Yeah, like which one?
Toe.
I don't see any toenails. Like, I don't know. Is it really a toe if there's no toenail? So there, and I remember just feeling so dumb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which, it sounds like a dumb question, except for if you've popped right out of school and you've never actually been in the field. Right.
Yeah.
And you don't know what a toe of a slope is, or maybe you've never looked at a plan set. I mean, I was lucky. I had a concrete professor that took plan sets and walked us out to the parking lot of the student services center and was like, this is what a beam is. This is what whatever.
How innovative, right? I mean, I look at it when in graduate school and planning, they never showed us a plat. They never took us through an approval process like that. And what's the first thing you're asked to do?
I mean, sit down and review a CUP. So so that was kind of this humbling experience where I went, holy cow, I'm going to have to ask questions to other people, because he never answered the question. He was just like, go find it. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, but the other thing is that just so much appreciation for the things that I did know what were from the piece of paper to a built something. So when I said I didn't know anything about transportation, really. I knew how to count cars. I'd taken that class where you sit there and you count volumes.
And they didn't teach you how to count any other road user, right?
I don't remember. But here's the good news. I met you later and we figured it out. But I was a structural engineering student. I was not a transportation student. I took a transportation class, and then you had to take something called like advanced traffic engineering or something. I don't know. It was like an extra class you had to take to
There's
graduate.
An oxymoron, advanced traffic engineering.
It's just more of the same. So, so it was weird when I went to graduate school and fell into transportation, So, and then it was because I'd gone to work in it, right, with the guy that with the toe of the slope situation. So I was learning what pieces of highways were, and I had never paid any real attention in those classes because I thought I'd go build skyscrapers. You know, it was 2005.
Well, you bring up a good point about mentoring, I think, right? And like how important that is, and how you're, how do I put this? You're kind of, especially as you get more advanced in your career, whether you're in consulting or the public sector, you know, somebody's asking you a question and you better think about your answer a little bit more, because you might not necessarily recognize how it comes off, right? And maybe you want it to sound that way, but to your point, younger in the profession and instantly just feeling like an idiot. And that, you know, yeah, that's tough. Even you're smart enough to overcome it. And maybe his whole objective was to make you curious and make you go find the answers, you know. But
he was from West Virginia. I mean, I don't know. You know, though, I like what you said though about in consulting, it's you've been hired to do a job, and a lot of times you can't bring this you can't ask certain questions, right? And it's those very entry level questions. I would love to be able to allow an entry level consulting, you know, planner one, or whatever you want to call them, an assistant planner, to come in and ask those kind of questions. But I never want them to ask that to our client, right? Because we've been hired as these. Yeah.
You're the experts. You're the chosen ones.
And you're right. That's
the team out. You beat the other team out by a half of a point.
17 points.
Chosen ones.
Right. So that's again, back to that mentoring side. And mentoring is one thing we can do to less experienced, or even our peers in our, you know, that's, I think we do that for each other here. We kind of peer mentor, but also it's the coaching side of things as a boss, right? So when you have employees, we have to remember that coaching is very different than mentoring. Coaching is the part where someone said something in a client meeting that they really shouldn't have said, and you come back and instead of beating them over the head, right, you say, hey, listen, let's talk a little bit about what happened and how we can improve that situation.
People problems, as you called it.
It's people engineering, right? You got to help out. So that's so much more effective for that next step than just saying you can't do this.
Right. All right, Don, what do you got? What's your humbling experience? Don't be too proud.
First of all, I can't help but think, if you know anything about my aversion to all things feet, if I'd have been in engineering school and they start talking about the toe of the slope, I'd have been like, I'm out of here. I'm going into another field for that. Well, I'm glad you went first, Commissioner Danley, because I was thinking of another one that we both experienced. And I know for you, this one was particularly hard. We, again, kind of in our early days of consulting and working together, we were basically given, for all intents and purposes, this $80,000 project. And, you know, I think we did some very thorough things on it. There's still the stuff I look back early in my career and go like, why in the hell did I recommend a Shero? Like, why did I do that? I wouldn't do that today. But anyway, we went through this $80,000 project. I think at the time, in terms of like solely just money for us, where we didn't have a bunch of sub-consultants, that was probably the biggest haul we had at that point. So it was significant. And we get through a draft version of it. And there were the comments you would expect. All right, we fixed those. We get to the next draft, and there was like undoing of the comments that were made on the first draft. And then it turns out, after spending $80,000, the damn thing was never adopted.
Oh.
And then so that's probably 10 years ago. Go back 3 or 4 years ago, and the same agency is going through to essentially do that exact same plan and spend $100,000 on it, without ever even acknowledging what was in the original one, or using that as a starting point. And I'm not looking back on it going, oh, this thing was like a national APA award winner by any stretch. But I can say this, there were things in that plan that weren't addressed for a lot more money a decade later. And I know for Chris, just the deflating experience of something like that we were intentionally thorough. We were intentionally doing it different. We were intentionally consulting instead of just regurgitating policy.
Yeah.
They didn't want shit to consult.
We put everything we had into that plan because we knew it was that important. And we knew it was just sort of a seminal plan for the agency that we were working for, and gave it everything. We had total buy-in from all the staff meetings, everybody involved. All the comments were all pointing us in the same direction, going, yeah, this is great. We like it. And then the gatekeeper. And I don't know how much farther I'll go than that, but I'll say that then everything completely and utterly blew up. And that was on my list. I thought about bringing that up today. But professionally, that was one of the more difficult things that I've experienced, because I to this day look back and go, I don't understand what happened, because every single department, every single staff, every committee member were all on board, and it went the direction that it went. And so enough of that. Do we have a whiskey? Because I might need it. Can you teleport it over?
I think this, well, I'd say this part of my message on this one, the pairing this week, is while some people are tempted to take shots of it, we shouldn't for various reasons, but maybe for this we could. I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction. And I'm going to go with 3 Amigos, Extra Añejo tequila. We are three amigos amongst ourselves, having worked together in this realm. And if I could summon the invisible swordsman, take a look at that, I think we can do it. But if you don't know tequila very well, and what añejo means and what extra añejo means, it's essentially about aging. So if you see a tequila that's an añejo, that means it has to be aged up to 1 to 3 years in an oak barrel. An extra añejo, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, I apologize for that, is 3 years or more. So it has a lot of the qualities, because of a charred oak barrel, you would expect from whiskey. This one is really good because it's aged 8 years in that oak barrel. But definitely the type of tequila, if you were used of taking the shots of cazadores in college, this ain't that. This is for sipping.
It's good stuff. I've become a bigger fan of tequila in the last year, and I'm on board. I can do that. Let's ride. And I was recently asked who to shoot it when I ordered. I'm like, no, man. I'm 45 damn years old. I'm not shooting tequila anymore. I want to sit, enjoy, and just absolutely, love the craftsmanship that went into it and the ingredients. That's where I kind of am in life. Like I don't shoot it.
No salt on your hand.
No.
I'm
good.
I
y'all know I spent like a month in Mexico just recently, and I learned. You didn't
send us any.
I know.
Finely aged tequila or mezcal.
Listen, I don't know anything about tequila or mezcal. I know one thing about mezcal. I don't like it, but I know, and now I'm being judged. But the thing about tequila and mezcal that they told me down there is that shooting tequila with salt and limes is a very American thing to do. And that in Mexico, the way that we drink tequila is you have it in a shot glass, but you sit and you sip it and you drink a beer with it. And it's not a shoot and then chase it with a beer. It's a sip it and you have your Modelo there. And I was like, are you sure I can't shoot it? And they were like, if you do that, I mean, you can.
Just like every other fine worldwide tradition and cultural occurrence, we've blown
Jaeger bombs.
I was going to say we've made it more efficient. We just need
it. All right. So before I get ahead of myself, just as a reminder to our audience, hit up our website, man, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Remember to check out Apple, Amazon, all the other places you can find our audio version. And man, things are going well, right? We appreciate your support and your feedback. So keep that up. All right. How can we help our audience on this discussion about consulting and planning, right? Let's open it up on that note to a constructive question. And that is, what is it that we as consultants, and I'm going to say we as a very general blanket statement there, what can we do better? What can we do to help the public sector, our clients largely, unless you're working for a private developer or something, deliver on their objective? What can we do? Any initial thoughts there?
We're perfect,
Well,
apparently. It's just us,
no.
the pregnant pause. No, go ahead, Jess.
I think the reason I pause is because it's like, what thing do I want to dig into right now? I think that coming from I was the client, for a long time, and then I went to work as a consultant, and that was the most enlightening experience. One, going from being a consultant to a client, and then going from a client back to being the consultant. When I became the client and had been a consultant, I was like, this is an amazing thing. I can teach my staff that there's no this us versus them thing, but there are consultants that are better at what they do than others. So picking the consultant,
like anything, yeah,
right, like anything, it's a menu of services, and you can get a sandwich at McDonald's, but you can also get a sandwich at your local sandwich shop, and it depends on what kind of sandwich you want, right? So I mean, nothing wrong with either one of those, but I'm kind of a local
And sometimes
sandwich.
the $20 burger isn't any better than the Big Mac, right?
Exactly.
The other side.
Exactly. Okay, that's a great point. Let's compare hamburgers to hamburgers here, right? Like there's
but
that
it has
$20
gold
local
flakes
one.
in the bun,
Oh,
Dawn.
and you can only order it if you can find the secret thing on the menu, and yeah.
Right.
So part of that's an experience, right? But with consultants, if you hold two consultants side by side that offer the same service, transportation planning, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, because you may need someone who is in transportation planning, but they're an expert in how transit organization funding works. You need a very different consultant than a transportation planner, like say me, that deals with system planning and policy and that sort of thing. I'm a little bit of a garbage planner, right? I can do a little bit of everything. But I'm not very deep in any one area. I'm a inch deep and a mile wide, right? But there are consultants out there and firms that specialize in things that they know about a very singular, narrow niche area in transportation planning, for example, but they're really deep. They know every best practice that's out there. They know what other places are doing. They can give you lots of really great advice, and they can make it work for your community.
Right.
So I think about that. And I think about, as a consultant, one, we can help our clients by saying, look, I know you really like working with Jessica Smith. I'm great, but that's not my specialty. And let me tell you someone I know who does have that specialty, right?
Wow.
And that is hard. That is hard to say.
Well,
I think turn that down.
Related to that, what I would say is, and this is something for the public sector folks to watch out for, is for consultants, be honest in your proposals about who's going to be doing the work.
Yeah.
Because in planning a lot as a professional services contract, it's illegal to ask for a budget and those kind of things. And so I've lost projects as a consultant because of it. And on the public sector side, I've been reviewing consultants where, oh man, here's a big name. I know that name. Wow, they're going to work on our project. And their intent is that person will never get their feet dirty in your community and be there. But they throw these resumes in there that here's the 3 rock stars or whatever that you think you're going to get. And they're not really contributing to the project at all. So one, be honest in that, and don't just throw a bunch of resumes as eye candy in there. The other one would be, if you're, say, putting in for a $50,000 project, don't show the client work product from a $500,000 project and lead them to believe they're going to get the same level of work. That just doesn't happen and doesn't occur. And those are the kind of things, if you're listening to this and you're on the public sector side, ask questions like, how much is this person going to be involved? Are those the kind of materials we're going to get? What was the budget of that project? Oh, it was 500,000. We only have 50. Can we get that same level of drawings or schematics or what have you?
So I'm hearing empathy from Jess, right? Like, and I'm completely in agreement. I've said this in previous episodes. I think that to be a good planner, frankly, I really do believe you need to be on both sides of this coin, and have experience from both sides to draw from, because I think it's impossible to have that empathy really without that. Like your point about the funding process, if you don't understand the insider element of things and find, fiscal year, end of budget, all that kind of stuff, like, man, it's going to be a tough road. And Don's thing about honesty and man, that's hard, right? And both of you have kind of made that point. And I'm going to kind of piggyback on that in a couple of different ways. How can the consultants be better? One, I'm going to say stop regurgitating your own stuff. So in other words, stop using the same report for every community. Do your client a service that you're getting paid for,
right?
And, create original content. Now, I understand that at times that in order to make a budget work, that sometimes you need to add some things that maybe you use in a previous report. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to ask yourself at what percentage does that red line sort of cross, right, of that report? If you're over, I don't know, 20-25% of report is stuff you just used in a different community, I think you're starting to wade into that a little bit, right? And the same thing with proposals. I think that yes, it can be a cost savings and time savings, but I don't know, for the most part, I like to be original as we can and come up with stuff that I think that truly addresses the need. The other thing I'm going to say on this, and this gets back to both your points, this is a broader one, man, and it's a tremendously huge issue that I don't know if we're ever going to get to. Honesty in the sense of telling clients, no, you don't need this project.
Yeah.
You do not need this. This was just done. I have an example in my own backyard here where a community did a transportation plan and it was only like 4 years old. And they went out and they got like $500,000 or something like that for another one to update it. And I'm just going $500,000 for a community the size of about, I think, 90,000 people at the time.
Come on.
And I'm just like, what are we doing? Why on earth do we need to
design
do that?
Your top priority project or something with that much money, right?
Like how much have things actually changed in that period of time? And there are times when I'm just like, this is the Eisenhower out of World War II said it, the military industrial complex, be wary of that. And I think that frankly, there's a consultant, especially on the DOT side of the coin, complex that exists of just keep on feeding them the work that they claim that they want. And it's a hard one to say no. I get it, but
well,
this is the frustration.
What you said about content, I mean, I've been in that situation, and literally what I try to do is tell the client, hey, look, to make this budget work, I want to give you guys this piece. I'm going to modify it slightly, but I'm pretty much giving you what we did for community X, and just want to be upfront with you about that. Or for things like design schematics or other things that are a little more boilerplate, throw that sucker in the appendix, because it's the technical staff that's going to look at it and do that. But no, you're right. When Jess and I were working with the firm back in North Carolina, I mean, there was a joke with a couple of them doing state DOT contracts of, they're going to go, this scope looks like project Z, so we're going to pull that one off the shelf, change the name and faces, put the lowest rung staff person on it so we can maximize our profit. And if the client isn't asking for anything different, I can't really blame them for doing that either.
And there are some things, and I would say specifically in engineering work, there are some things with certain clients that it is, you have to do the same thing over and over again. But with planning work, I have a really hard time with you guys. I have a really hard time justifying using something from another community or whatever. And I think we should be specific about what we're talking about. We're talking about pulling and you guys correct me if there's something else you're thinking of, but what I think of off the top of my head is like a long range transportation plan. Some of that stuff is prescriptive if you're doing it for an MPO or a metropolitan planning organization. Well, the problem with that being so prescriptive, quote unquote, is that it's really not that prescriptive. If you go back and look at the CFRs, yes, there are certain things that you have to have.
CFRs are
Code of Federal Regulations. So the explanation that process law about how what goes into a plan and how different government entities are set up. So because MPOs are dealing with federal funding in a certain urbanized area, they are going to have to follow those CFRs or Code of Federal Regulations to look at what is required for that organization. But when you dig into it and you look at what is required in an LRTP, it's not that prescriptive. I mean, it's, yes, you have to have these pieces and you have to have these core products as an MPO, but that doesn't mean that you do it the same way for every MPO in that state. I mean,
a house needs a foundation and it needs some corners, but otherwise you can get creative.
Well, I think outside of that, I remember when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and dealing with housing affordability issues that were they look simple back then compared to today of what it's become. But there was a consultant from the Northeast that did a affordable housing study, and I think of the 6 tools they proposed, 3 of them weren't even legal in the state of North Carolina.
My gosh.
So you're like, wait a minute, you clearly took this from another plan you did somewhere else. And hey, if you come up with a tool that isn't legal, A, discuss it, B, acknowledge it, because it's very good to have a strategy. Hey, it's not legal here. Maybe you get together with your league of cities and go after it. But it was clear, it was just like, plop it down. Go there for vacation and enjoy the hippie lifestyle in Asheville and go back to our Northeast bungalows or something.
So let's change gears and look at the other side of the ledger here and ask ourselves, what can public agencies and entities do a better job of, right? They're generally the ones seeking the consultant's help, and they're not always great at that, not always being a quote unquote good client, right? So what can they do to help themselves?
Stop cookie cuttering your RFPs and your RFQs. No, stop it.
Wait, let's back up.
Stop
the difference between a request for proposal and a request for qualification.
That too. Okay. But either one, so they're cookie cutter, right? It's the same. I understand that we have to have a process that is clear and fair when it comes out of our public agencies, but private companies also have to have clear and fair processes as well when they hire other people. I mean, I think that we get wrapped around the axle as public agency representatives that, we have to have all this transparency and stuff, which is true, but it's not that difficult. And work with your procurement department and say, listen, this needs to be, this needs to be flexible enough to work across different departments in our organization. We have construction, we have planning, we have design, the different pieces of this. So I think that one of the things that we can do as planners, both internally in public organizations and externally as a consultant, is we can work together to figure out how to make better requests for proposals and requests for qualifications. You all were talking about, not letting those proposals be, don't reuse something else, like be clear, be original, and that kind of stuff in our work and also our proposals. That takes a lot of time and money. And I can just see, the folks that are watching the bottom lines of both organizations go, this is taking so much labor off the plate. So if we want to make sure that the market is fair, right? That we've got a fair market, we've got to do a couple of things. One, I think we should stop asking for previous experience. I know that there's this thing that I see a lot in public agencies. It wants you to show, it's not about previous experience like you and me, but they're asking for the company to show previous like projects. All that does is keeps newcomers to the market out and lets those 100-year-old companies that have been doing it the same way. And that's what I'm not saying that we shouldn't have previous experience. You should have experience to do a job, but just like any job, there's got to be an entry level point. So if you haven't, you were talking about, Chris, like losing all those jobs at the beginning of your start out with your company, like how did you finally break into that market? I mean,
that's a whole other story.
Well, I agree with that, because it's one of those things of, and I remember on the public sector side, when we were establishing a long range planning department and we wanted something different, and I'd get these proposals that was giving me their experience was doing the same thing for our agency for the last 15 years. I'm like, what part of the RFP that said we don't want this did not get? Mine's a little more process oriented, and I think it's the type of thing that saves a lot of time and headaches on either side. The first one is when you're going to have a request for proposals or qualifications going out for consultants, schedule the whole thing out. That
Yes.
includes the meeting date for you to get together with your colleagues and evaluate the proposals and block out the interview times, because the worst thing that can happen is say our proposal is due April 1st.
Mhm.
And then when you get the proposals, oh, I guess I'll schedule the selection committee. And all of a sudden, because of schedules, you can't do that till May 1st.
Mhm.
And then time is money. And related to that would be to recognize in what you're requesting the time and money that consultants put into just chasing this work.
Yeah.
And planning work especially probably only has a profit margin of about 10%. So if we're talking even $100,000 project, the profit's going to be $10,000. And I can tell you that money can easily be spent putting together
Easy.
a 30, 40, or 50-page proposal. And oh, by the way, in a modern era that I'm sure Mr. Danley will second, stop asking for printed copies in a
Yes,
digital
please.
age.
Yes.
So there's
please.
my quick ones. Commissioner Danley.
Well, geez, there's a lot to unpack there. So a big fan of ours is a person who that last comment is definitely appropriate to. And we'll say his name on the air because he realizes what happened. Brock, that last one was for you.
It's
but it's ubiquitous. I agree. There are many agencies that are still looking at RFQs and Ps with specific requirements that are 25 years old. Please print 15 copies. Make one with an original. I laughed at the last one. I'm like, I guess I have to get Johann Gutenberg's original printing press out of the cellar and use that for the original copy. I'm like, there's no such thing as an original copy anymore, right? Like, it's just silly. On that same note, dear Lord, please stop asking for the consulting industry to craft proposals starting December 14th and due January 8th. We'd like to celebrate Christmas too. That'd be cool, right? Like, I can't tell you how often that happens. That just happened in our own backyard, and we could have easily won that project. But we both were just like, no, man, this is a 2-week turnaround right at Christmas. And just like,
literally
no,
do like January 4th.
4th, yeah.
And
like,
it's not it's not just Christmas. There's so many things happening in November and December in America, right?
Well, I'm like, what staff?
Well, then give us a month.
What person in a public agency wants, boy, I can't wait to get back from my Christmas break and read through these proposals. It's for your own health.
Yeah. Then extend the deadline, right? Instead of it being a 2-week turnaround, give everybody a little more time to breathe and piece it together as they can, right? Especially to Dawn's point. Look, if it's a busy time of a year and this is a project that we would love to go after, but hey, man, my hair is on fire delivering product to others. I need time. And if I don't have time because the turnaround is so tight, then, I might end up passing on it. So you end up filtering out, I think, prospective consulting companies because of that process. Mine is going to be, there's lots, but because what you just said too, Jess, about equal opportunity type things or women owned and that sort of thing, we know that is a notorious thing in our industry that unfortunately, and I know there's a horror story that Dawn brought up of a particular person that we know in North Carolina who had her name attached to a whole bunch of proposals unbeknownst to her to try to fill that very DBE qualification. And she's just like, what are you talking? I had no idea.
It was like $200,000 worth of work if you totaled up the DBE percentage in the packet that the board approved for those projects. And she saw less than 20,000.
Yeah.
Did she know? You said she didn't know she was on the project.
She didn't even know she was on the projects. They won them, and she was there for the DBE goal, like $200,000, and ended up getting 10%. And it's one of those things that's like, hey, I get you got to cut it back a little bit, if it ends up 120, that's part of the business, but that's misleading.
But you know what? Also that it's not just DBEs. Sometimes we're bad to our sub-consultants as consultants, right? We have got to stop looking at each other as competition and start realizing that, especially right now. I mean, I realize we are competition, and I realize that, when Chris started his business, there was there was a lot going on there in our economy. Right now, there's more planning work than we have planners to do it, right? There's more niche work than we have people that know how to do that. So, the boutique firms y'all are busy. It takes us how long to try and find an hour a week to podcast together because y'all are so busy. I've got work coming out my ears and I'm trying to, I'm just trying to do a thing here and there. So
on a similar topic to that, and shifting gears maybe a little, because this also happens, and this is maybe for the public out there that might be listening, or neighborhood associations. And I've seen it a lot of like, God, why is our city hiring a consultant to do this stuff? Why can't they do it on their own? Well, wait a minute. One, you're probably low on staff at the city. Two, don't discount the fact that in the consulting realm are people that can go deep on subjects. And that's what's needed, because if you had a person at a city that could go deep in 10 different areas, you couldn't afford them. And if you could, you'd never be getting anything else done. So don't cast that off. I mean, I look at one of our specialty areas is ADA and walkability.
Mm-hmm.
That is stuff that you can get so deep on that a city staff's probably not going to know that stuff. And even some of the general consulting firms are not going to know. So don't bemoan a city for spending the money to find the right expertise, because you know what? They could also bluff it and screw it up completely, and just be mindful of that.
And I think that's spot on. And the other thing is that, we're constantly asking the city, why are they spending so much money? Why do we pay, when as time marches on, we're hoping that wages go up, right? In our country across the board, but we still beat our public folks up a lot and I think that sometimes as the public, we forget that when you say, why is the city budget so big? It seems inflated or something like that. Well, look at how much of that is labor. How much of that is paying salaries to everything from your janitor to your city manager. Those folks, everyone has a job there, and it's not keeping up with private market jobs. And if we can't be competitive, not even with benefits or anything anymore. So if we can't be competitive, and this is broad strokes, I'm some places they're doing all right, but if we can't be competitive with other job roles for that same background and education, how are we going to attract those less experienced folks and the young folks that are going to be the next borough manager? They got to start somewhere, or the next county manager. I'm using Alaska terms today. So I really think that as the public, we need to be very conscientious of looking, and when we're yelling at our politicians, why are you spending so much money? Ask them why they're not spending more money on wages if you want your city to do these things internally. And then on top of that, remember that it's going to be pricey to get those specialists in to look at everything from a new HR process to things like your specialized planning processes and specialized engineering. You don't want just anybody designing your sewage system. I mean, come on, let's figure out who is the specialist.
Here's another funny part of that when we say about employment. Well, if I can take a $300,000, a $500,000, say a major comprehensive plan or a major corridor study, pretty much 100% of that money is going into employing somebody.
It is.
Whereas if you take a $5 million road construction project, you're probably still only getting $500,000 worth of labor, because the rest isn't materials. And granted, there's an upstream effect on employment in things. But let's not look at the basic math of things there.
Right. Just dollars spent is not the same. It's what are those dollars being spent on? And I, it's kind of, it's sort of, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth when we're like, spend less, but also, things cost more. And then on top of all of that, it's like, well, this is helping the economy. When your government is spending money on labor, you are helping the economy. I'm not letting anybody off the hook. Like, we need to be spending it in the right places, but think about how this is life-changing stuff when you bring up wages 3% every year to adjust for cost of living increases or inflation or anything. And those are big pain points right now. And I know that that's in everyone's face right now. And it's kind of a naturally large this year, the increase in things like inflation, but and costs of materials and food and things. So all of this is just to say, let's think through it and not just throw out that we spend too much, you charge too much, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's see what we're getting for our money and make some individual decisions. It's a complicated problem. It's not just spend less.
and something I would add, and I think kind of what you're getting at a little bit too, is I don't know, the way that I view personally I'm going to say responsibility in this profession is, I think it's responsible of me as a consultant to constantly be pushing the envelope, to think of new ways of doing things, to take a look around and be a sponge and see, oh, you know what really worked 3 states over, because I had a chance to work on a project there and bring it home, so to speak, or wherever my next project is. I think that's my job. And
absolutely,
I'm supposed to be creative. And that's not to say that someone that's in the public sector can't also be creative. Of course they can. However, their job is just different. Their job is implementing those ideas, and that's hard because they have to deal with the politics. They have to deal with sometimes public scrutiny and anger. There's budget issues, there's HR issues, there's legal and regulation issues, right? There's so many things that they're already day to day having to work through. They might not always have the opportunity as an individual or staff to be able to kind of sit back and think, oh man, how can we do this different and really get creative? Because they may not always have the time to do it, and so I kind of view that as the role of the consultant as well, as to have creative solutions to modern problems and constantly be evolving.
And the role from the public sector side, I always saw that when I was in public sector, I saw that as my expertise was that community. I needed to know everything that was going on there, and you just don't have enough. Good for you listeners if you can do it all, but I did not have the brain space to also be aware of other communities in that kind of depth, right? And so I relied on my friends that were doing work nationally or doing work in multiple cities, or had worked even with my neighbor cities or communities. And I would rely on them and give them calls and say, I'm having this problem. Do you know any potential solutions? That was that first phone call. And usually those were friends that were consultants, or they were in some, just calling people in different places and saying, hey, how is your city handling that? And so knowing, calling other peers in other public sector jobs. So knowing that you have a network and building that network of both consultants who are doing different types of work, and also knowing others in public agencies that you can call and say, I know that we're not exactly the same, but this is something we're struggling with in my community. Yeah. Have you been able to solve it? How did you do it? And sometimes they point you to a specialist and they go, we had to hire this person, so that was the job though. Be focused on your community and figure out what the details are.
And related to that, going back to Chris's creativity in that, what I want the local staff to be is, I'm going to bring you creative stuff and new ideas, but I need you to tell me, hey, council member X really doesn't go for that kind
bring
of thing.
That expertise. Yeah.
So
bring that local stuff.
If we're going to propose it and we know there's some consternation over it, okay, let's see if there's ways to frame it that fits that. And the other one is like, hey, that's a great idea. We fought that battle 3 years ago and those scars are still pretty fresh. Let's keep that a little bit on the down low, because that's the type of stuff I know I appreciate. So I don't look like the dip hole up there in front of the city council or whatever, proposing something that's a battle they already fought and tired of, and they don't want to fight it again.
And that's the thing. So, you want to move them forward. We don't want to make you step 6 feet back every time you take one step forward, because as a consultant, we get to leave eventually when the contract runs out. And I never want to leave my public agency folks with a bigger problem than they had to begin with.
All right. I want you to imagine that there are people listening right now, hopefully, whatever they are, on a walk at their office, listening in the car, whatever they're doing. And somebody in our audience might be in the public sector and has been approached to go to the private sector, right? Or there's somebody coming out of college and that's what they're thinking. and or whatever the scenario is, but somebody out there, I guarantee right now, talking to you, listener, is thinking, man, I think I want to go into the private sector, or man, that offer that they gave me sounded good, but I've never been in the private sector consulting anyway. I want to know, what are the things that they should hear from us about, hey man, you need to think about this? And also, what's really cool about consulting that you probably didn't know? That. What are those things?
I will take the first one here.
Okay.
God, and man, we could talk about some scars from that, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we can.
If you're
or the tequila.
If you're not familiar with the consulting side and you don't know what the term utilization means, it's essentially the calculation of the percentage of your hours that you bill to projects. And depending where you exist in your career and what they're offering, the expectation of how much time you will bill to your projects versus other things may vary. So if you're relatively entry level, you're going in, you probably should expect to have 80%, 90% of your work in a 40-hour week billed to a project. Now, what that means is they better have enough work lined up and somebody else is getting that work to feed it to you. Because if they also expect you to go out and get work and maintain 80 to 90%,
make it rain.
That ain't happening, right? And if you're being recruited for like a manager level position or ownership or those kind of things, ask the same questions, because if you're only expected to have a 50 or 60% utilization rate, which means you're using the other time to chase work and get work, understand the reality of that, very much so, and ask them detailed questions. What do you see me working on in the first 6 months? What projects do you have? How many hours do you expect
What's
to
that
give
backlog look like, man?
And the hard one to ask is, am I going to be competing with others in my same office for that? Because everybody is territorial. Everything is a turf battle. I don't care what they say about the corporate culture. That's a reality.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a negative thing, what you're saying, Don, that territory, people are protecting their clients for good reasons. They know that client, they're familiar with them, and they're representing their company. So if you come in hot off the street and you're like, oh, I saw so-and-so the other day, and you didn't talk to the guy that usually manages that client, maybe they know something that you don't, because they've been working with them for 10 years. But I was going to go back to the part where you're thinking about whether or not you would be a good fit for private consulting in the planning world. And I think one of the things is that, remember that you have some other things to negotiate when you go in and talk about that job. Remember, you were interviewing in this hiring climate that we're in right now. Yeah, I was going to say in the climate right now, you listen. There is more position. Work. Yeah, there's more. This is, what do they call this? This is a seller's market. You can sell yourself. And the thing I want you to remember is there are 3 things besides salary and benefits that you need to look at. And with salary and benefits, that can be a number of things, right? But I'm mostly talking about like health insurance benefits, 401k matching, or whatever type of retirement situation. And then and your salary, of course, is what your paycheck looks like. But also ask straight up front, and these are things that that are negotiable, honestly, and or you should figure out if they're negotiable, because they might not be for that role. It might be like, this is what it has to be. Figure out if your utilization goal is negotiable, because when you have a 95% utilization rate goal that you're supposed to be making, just take 40 hours a week and, multiply that by 90, and you're going to figure out that you don't have time to do anything else on the clock except for bill clients. Okay?
There's no stopping by another cubicle to chit chat.
How that blown call in the Super Bowl. No. Right back to work.
No answering emails not related to a project. Not
on the clock.
Marketing meetings.
Right.
But hold on. But one other thing, that includes training.
That's what I was going to say. So
Right?
that includes professional development. You're not going to be doing that you're not going to have time to do that on the clock. So
those
all of a
4
sudden,
days you're at a conference.
Yeah. So what that means, and the reason that it's that way is because, I mean, there's many different reasons to have a utilization rate set at that thing. But if the thing is that you can bill 95% of your time to a client and they've got that much work for you to do, that's why they hired you, because they needed you to build this. They need you to serve this client. So think about your 40 hours at work week. It's not really a 40-hour work week anymore. And so then the other question is, what is the hourly work expectation? And if your company is saying it's 40 hours a week, we expect you to be billing 95% of your 40 hours a week to a client. What that means is that you may work 50 or 55 hours a week, because that other 8 to 10, 15 hours a week are going to be at those lunch meetings for ASCE and those APA meetings, and the time that you're doing,
I'm volunteering for the state planning conference.
Right. And and companies want you to do that. So you need to talk to them about, okay, well, if that's the case, I need to look at, what this looks like. So then when you know what that utilization expectation is and what your hours expectation is, you also want to see whether or not the ability to adjust the salary and compensation accordingly to what to what you want to look at. That salary looks real good until you realize you're going from a 38-hour work week over at the public agency with a pension benefit to your 55-hour work week over there.
And it ain't like the Flintstones where the horn blows and you slide down the dinosaur tail at 5 o'clock.
It does not. And so
that's good advice.
But I have one more. And the third one is flexibility in your schedule. Now, a lot of companies are doing, and public agencies too, are doing great at this, but make sure that if you need remote work flexibility, if you need to leave at 3 o'clock and go get the kids, make sure that you have that conversation up front and say, is this something I can do? And then know that they're going to expect you to manage your time when you come on board at a consulting firm.
Yeah. So I'm going to hit my, you better be ready for this. And then I'm going to hit my positive, and then maybe we'll get into a potential lightning round amongst ourselves. So David Bowie said it best. Under pressure. Right?
I thought that was
because
no, wait, never mind.
Right. Rob Van Winkle, according to his friends. So I had no clue about that. When I went from the public to private, initially I was shielded from the pressure of being in a consulting company at a consulting. I got laid off, and then the expectation was, okay, now you got to go mind your work. There was no work to be had. You want to talk about pressure? We went from an era of 3 to 4, maybe 5 submittals on our big RFP to about 40 during the Great Recession. And whoever got that work was clearly not profitable. They were just keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
Right. But my point is that, and Don and I worked at, one of the largest, active transportation companies in the country. And every Monday, buddy, I don't care what day it is. I don't care what contract you just won. Here's the call. You're going to have to answer how billable you're going to be. What projects do you have that are coming online? What do you think? What's the win probability?
Yeah.
And every single week, you had to deal with that. And that happened to me in all 3 of the companies that I worked for. There was that same situation. And the pressure in consulting, if you are not a worker bee, I'm just going to use that not as a negative term, but that's just the way it is, right? If there is an expectation of you to bring work in, you have to deal with that, because that is a stress that is not on your shoulder. It's a different stress than what you would have from the public sector, right? And if you have a background in sales, that's good. If you've ever known how or been part of a sales process, this dude had to sell knives at one point in his life, and I sucked at it. But you
suck at selling knives.
They were expensive. They were very expensive. But I was a personal trainer, so I had to learn how to sell my own skills that way. And so you have to understand that to an extent, there's times when it's a sales job, right? You are selling your skills and your company's skills. I can't stress that enough. If you like conventional, If you like structure and predictable, then consulting may not be your thing, right? If you like
planning might not be your thing. Let's be honest.
But if you like the change, the lack of I don't want it to be the same every single day. I want it. If somebody who worked in the private or public sector for 30 years, I'm like, how on earth do you do that? I don't understand, because I cannot relate to that, right? But hey, man, some people do that, and good for them. So I just think that's important to know, that you have to understand you, and you have to understand how you deal with that type of a pressure all the time. It comes up all the time. I don't care what company it is. I don't care what they tell you. If you have a sales expectation of 30% marketing was what you're going to have spent toward, then there's an expectation that you bring in 5 and 6 figure contracts.
Because you have to draw in enough to support yourself and what we're calling the worker bees. That's that's the math of it. It's pretty simple.
Some people are so good at that. They are really, really good at that. And if you have a deep expertise in something, oh my gosh, consulting is for you. I'm going to say, because you just pick up the phone.
Right. So there's my positive, because I love what I do.
Wait, that was the positive?
No, I'm getting there.
Oh,
I love what I do for my profession. It took a minute. I had to get run through the ringer, but once I got through that and learned the ropes and understood my own strengths as someone who is, I'm going to say creative, but not just creative. There's 2 parts to this coin, man. You can be creative, but I got to bust through that door and convince you that what I'm selling is a good idea. That's the other part of it. And for me, fortunately, I've been successful in that. Don, I think, all 3 of us in that way have been successful in that regard. But I love what I do. Every day is a little bit different. I'm fortunately in a position where I get to kind of pick things I want to do, including a podcast, right? I mean, if I work for a conventional firm or even the public sector, I might not even be able to get to do this, right? So I don't want to paint all consulting with a negative bad brush, because it is definitely not. It's situational. It's where you are in your career, maybe even regional. I don't know, but point is there's definitely upsides, but you need to know what that lay of the land looks like.
All right, so we're going to go lightning round here. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to have to reframe this. Most memorable traveling experience while consulting.
Oh my gosh.
You mean like on the job?
Like for a job. So I'll start then. Had a federal contract with EPA. I lived in North Carolina. The project was in Northeast Montana. I had to fly to Regina, Saskatchewan.
Regina?
Yes, Regina. That's how it's pronounced.
Just checking.
Had to fly to Regina, Saskatchewan, because that was the closest airport I could get to then come back into my own country to do consulting work for the federal government, which means you also have to get some other clearances to use federal money to fly outside the country. And telling them that flying 8 hours away in North Dakota was not as convenient as 3 hours away in Regina, Saskatchewan. So at least I got to see Saskatoon and that territory and things, which I might not have done before. And I won't tell you about the hotel and having to eat at McDonald's every day, the lack of any other.
You had to, in Canada, you got to eat at McDonald's?
No. Back in Montana after I drove from that. And so like the customs agent at the airport in Regina is like, oh, so you're here from the United States. And I had to check I was here on business. So they automatically think, what business are you doing in Canada, you crazy American? I'm like, well, no, I'm actually doing business in the United States. Well, wait a minute, you're from the United. Well, I had to fly here to get. You kind of got this smile. I was like, yeah, we hear that all the time. And have a nice visit.
Oh my gosh,
that's awesome.
My most memorable. Oh man, there's been a lot of good trips, man. I've traveled a lot in the last 12, 13 years. I've seen a lot of beautiful places, some not so beautiful places. Man, you know what? Like, I'm going to hit one that you and I experienced again when we were on the road together though. And that was, Don and I had the good fortune. One of the most beautiful places I know of, and it happens to be in our state, is up in the panhandle of Idaho, about 90 miles from the Canadian border. And if you don't know the area, you ought to go, because between Coeur d'Alene, Idaho and the Montana border, there is a 72-mile rail trail called the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. It's named after the tribe up there, and it's perfect. I mean, it is smooth as butter, man. When you ride your bike on this trail, and there's sections of it, there's an old bridge going over the lake that's exclusive to bike path traffic, and just stunning. Well, there was this one particular section, man, where Don and I kind of went, and we were away from the road, away from the highway, and this big, beautiful, like kind of a lake-ish pond kind of a thing. And it was so freaking stunning that I had to stop. And man, twice in this podcast, I'm revealing that I literally was moved to tears.
The times I've seen you cry. Yes.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, I don't know what came over me, but it was so tranquil and so peaceful and beautiful that I just thought, man, it doesn't get any better than this. And guess what? I'm getting paid to do this because we were doing a project, and it was just awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I so a lot of my career has been on highways and intersections. So you go to glorious places like, and I'm going to tell you about Kansas City, Missouri. So I was on the FHWA research team for, they had several different names. They were called double crossover diamonds at the time. I think now they're called diverging diamond interchanges, but it's the ones where they kind of look like this. Anyway, Google it, diverging diamond interchange.
DOT porn.
Yep, absolutely. It's real good stuff. So I was on the team that was looking at queuing links and signal timing change and stuff. I don't even know anymore. I've forgotten more about this project than I probably ever learned. But the interesting thing is that we were in Kansas City, and I am from a barbecue state, North Carolina.
Oh,
and so
yeah, you are.
Of course, I had to eat some Kansas City barbecue. I was like, I don't know. So Kansas City, you're still on the fence. I'll go back someday and check it out. But the thing that was most memorable is that it was 10 degrees and the wind was blowing like a hurricane, because I'm out in the plains, and we're looking at this interchange. We were doing before and after evaluation, and this was the before evaluation.
God.
And we had to put these big camera poles up because we were using like a I'm probably going to get this wrong, like a LiDAR. Anyway, it was a thing that would start recording stuff when it saw moving vehicles to do different counts. And we were trying to see.
Is that how you wrote it in the proposal?
Oh my God.
Put these thingies up there that,
okay. Research proposals are a totally different thing.
Yeah.
We will have to talk about
belabor that one.
Yeah, that's a totally different thing. That is like a mixture of, anyway, that was one of my favorite jobs, is doing research. Anyway, so we had these big pieces of equipment up on poles. Sometimes we had to bring our own infrastructure to get them up. And so it was all of this, it was some labor work, and there was a lot of outside work. So I remember sitting in the car, and we had taken one of the gals that worked in bike and ped research, and she and I are sitting in the car like this, and she's from Wisconsin and is like, this is cold for me too, right? And so we're sitting there freezing our little tails off, counting cars and bicycles and pedestrians and all this kind of stuff, and whatever else we were collecting data for. And I just remember thinking, why is it so cold? And then it started snowing sideways. I have moved since, a couple of years later, I moved to Fairbanks, Alaska. And let me tell you, like when it's 10 degrees and it's snowing sideways and the wind is blowing, people in Alaska are cold. We're just like, could it just be 20 below and no wind? That would be better. So I remember traveling there and being like, I had never been in weather like that before. I had lived in the South my whole life and had never, that was as far west as I had ever traveled. And I was probably 25 years old.
Well, and that's another part of the consulting world, right? Like, especially if you work, I know, independent work for yourself, you're going to go where the job takes you, man. Cause sometimes sometimes you're going where the contract is. And I recall trying to drive up to Whitefish, Montana for a project interview in December, going over this massive pass. And I've got a picture of it. I'm going like,
for a job that was wired for somebody else.
Right. And I asked repeatedly, is this wired? Is this wired? And no, there's a legitimate chance. Blah, blah, blah. I went
What do you mean wired?
It was set for somebody else. There was.
What?
Do they already have somebody in mind for that project? And we threw our name in the hat, and they said, do you want to interview? And they said, you got to interview over the phone. I said, no, I'm going to be there in person because you don't know who I am. And I need you to know who I am. You're going to hear and feel my presence, not having known me, because I know that will help me in this interview. Over a phone, that ain't going to cut it. Right. I understand that part of this show. So I went all the way up there in a rental car in the dead of winter, man. And I interview went great. I got all the way home and they said, guess what, man? You came in second. Gosh. And I'm like, well, who came in first? And they said, oh, the local firm, because the planner, the county planner, just went to go work for that consulting firm and knows that like the back of their hand. So it was wired the whole time.
Makes no sense.
It was complete. Anyway, my point though is that I think we all have memories of staying in hotels that were a bit sketchy, Airbnbs that were a bit sketchy, that maybe were advertised as not so sketchy, but you went anyway.
Council chambers that were pretty sketchy.
Flying the cheapest flights, which are never at a great time.
Spending a week in Topeka, Kansas one day.
One of my consulting girlfriends, she's an engineer. She was traveling a lot for a job. She was like a sales engineer for like a pipe company or something. It's very strange, but she was so funny. She used to say, she'd text me. I'd be like, where are you this week? She's like, I'm in so-and-so at a Holiday Inn, glorious, glamorous work travel. It's always awful.
Oh yeah. I've stayed at a hotel where I like, what is there an iron in there? Oh, those get stolen.
No, there's bars on the window.
A hotel iron, right? Like, come on. Anyway. So I guess on that, I'll ask one more quick question and we'll probably have to call this a show. It's already been well over an hour.
No. We had a lot to say.
On that note, do you have a war story of like worst meal as a consultant on the road or something that you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that happened?
You know what? You guys can go with worst meal, but I can tell you some of the best meals I've ever had as a consultant are with Don Kostelic, because you would come into town. Like Don lived on the other side of the state for some reason, and our office was on the other side. And when he'd come in, he'd go, look, Jess, I hate eating alone. And I was like, what? He'd say, let's go get some lunch. And even though I lived in that city, I did not know these cool little places that Don had found, being a kind of a tourist there all the time. And so, my gosh. Yeah. And Don, I don't know if you remember this, but you took me to this, it was kind of a market, but they also cooked food there. It was Greek, I think. It was over right past the university. Oh my gosh, it was so good. And I went there all the time after that. But it was Greek Mediterranean.
Well, therein lies my food laws all the time on the road, right? And determining going, man, I can't go here. I can't go there because you're right. So
well, these people spoke only Greek, I think.
Similarly,
so cool.
I mean, when I didn't get
locals better.
When I didn't get to enjoy the haute cuisine in Raleigh, and I was in these small towns in North Carolina, and you're trying to find breakfast, and I swear to God, it's like what was the Dixie Chick song? You look all around this town, and all she saw was Earl. And all you see is Waffle House.
Told us what to do with Earl too.
And a Waffle House, and you're like, well, at least it's not the Velveeta bologna biscuit at Hardee's. So I guess I'm going to settle for Waffle House again.
Listen, I got no qualms with Waffle House. She's done me good for a long time.
They cook the hell out of that food, man. It's dead and every bit of bacteria is out, right?
You need it. It's necessary at some points in life.
Well, I'll finish this
worst meal.
For me, I don't know if it was my worst meal, but it was damn sure a memory and all. And both of you were there, which is a rare thing. And that was it was at our training at that quaint little town with the place up on the hill that we were the courthouse or whatever it was in North Carolina. And I ordered
Silva, North Carolina.
oh God.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of a cool place, but I ordered
Silva's really cool, but I don't think there's any good food
I ordered my buffalo or bison burger, whatever, and they brought out
that was your first mistake.
A burger and a bun, and I'm like, it's lean meat, right? It's very lean, so it needs a little something to help get down. And I just asked, can I have like a little bit of mayo? And the guy, remember that, Jess? I don't know. Goes back into the kitchen, brings the entire jar of mayonnaise and slams it down with a knife. And
with
here
a
you
knife
go,
stuck
sir.
in it. The lid wasn't even on.
Was
Like,
it Duke's?
wow.
Did they bring you Duke's?
Customer
Yes, it was
service.
Duke's. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
At least they brought you the good stuff.
It's quality mayo.
Oh, there you go. There you go. No.
You
All
asked for
right.
a hamburger. You didn't ask for something all the way. You didn't ask for cheese on it. Like, try to be specific, sir.
I guess I had to learn my lesson. So consulting, it's just a carnival ride that keeps on giving, and some days you know enjoy it, other days it's a rain out, but overall we're, I think, all satisfied with what we're doing and keep on doing it. And hopefully we've been able to answer some questions for any of the audience out there that might be thinking about it. And I would encourage you, this is the interactive portion of our show. Reach out to us, man, because we're happy to talk about this and answer questions that you might have. So email us at planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. The website is theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. We'd happy to talk to you anytime.
Hear your war stories.
Yeah. If you got a war story, we'd happy to read that on the air in one of our future episodes. So anyway, all right. Consulting. Let's call that a wrap. Thank you, commissioners. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, you're past the due date. You can't do that. It's not allowed.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Better luck next time. Paper copy on that. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. See you next time. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, past episodes, the video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. You want to tweet at us? Go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.